I'm a New Yorker. I've known Trump's a bully for a long time. This is not news to me or anyone else here. And I know how to take him on. Don't back down in the face of a bully. Confront him. Take him on. Donald Trump must be stopped. I've beaten him before, and I will do it again.
And now there are 23. That was New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio Thursday promising to take on President Trump as he announced his run for the 2020 Democratic nomination. De Blasio follows Montana Governor Steve Bullock, who also jumped into the race this week, even as former Vice President Joe Biden maintains a wide lead in national and key state polls. All this as another Democratic hopeful looks to reboot, with former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke saying he regrets launching his campaign with that Vanity Fair cover.
I think it reinforces that perception of privilege, and that headline that said I was born to be in this. In the article was attempting to say that I felt that my calling was in public service. No one is born to be president of the United States of America, least of all me.
Wall Street Journal columnist Karl Rove is a former senior advisor to President George W. Bush. Karl, welcome. First, before I give you a chance to go after Beto, I want to talk about Joe Biden, because you predicted a while ago that Biden was going to be stronger than a lot of people thought. And sure enough, he's showing remarkable strength. I think it's the biggest story of the campaign so far. How do you explain how well Biden is doing in the polls?
Well, there must be a lot more traditional Democrats than we thought they were. I mean, at the beginning of this contest, we were told that this was all going to be predicated on a new kind of a Democrat, exemplified by AOC, by Bernie Sanders, by Elizabeth Warren, that the Democratic Party had gone hard left. Now, maybe the activist base has, maybe a lot of primary voters have, but I think that the broader polls indicate there are a lot more traditional Democrats who, rather than, throwing out our entire healthcare system with the so-called Medicare for all,
right,
government-run single-payer healthcare system, really want to have improvements and repairs made to the Affordable Care Act, as Joe Biden has been talking about.
But here's the other question, though, just in terms of the election in 2020. Could Donald Trump and be scaring enough Democrats into maybe making a very pragmatic decision about who can best beat Donald Trump?
There could be that, because if you've been down and you really don't like the guy who's on top, that's sometimes that dynamic that you described works. But also we have a thing that I really do think the Democratic Party, the ordinary Democrats in places like Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada are not the kooky left-wingers that we see in Cambridge and Brooklyn and some of the more college-lined campuses of tree-lined campuses around the country.
Or in the U.S. Congress, I might add.
Or the U.S. Congress, or at least the loudmouths in the U.S. Congress, the ones who draw attention to themselves. I mean, you look at it, the Democrats did take control of the House by basically flipping 31 districts that there was a Republican incumbent and the district had been carried by Donald Trump. And those people, those 31 Democrats, tend to be more centrist, but they also tend to be a lot more silent than the loudmouths who are grabbing attention by intentionally or unintentionally grabbing the attention on the left.
So how are these other Democrats now, with Biden as strong as he is, how are they going to go after him? Is it going to be with policy proposals? Is it going to be trying to dig up things about his past? How are they going to do it?
Well, I think that both of those things are likely. I was out at the Milken conference a week or two ago. I thought it was interesting. I was on a panel with Nirndra Tanda and Jim Messina, both Hillary Clinton aficionados, sort of what passes for, quote, the establishment in the Democratic Party.
Right.
And a question was asked, how are people going to respond when they start going after Biden? And I thought it was interesting. Both of them said, well, there'll be a price to be paid because Democrats don't want Democrats to take on other Democrats in the presidential contest. I thought that was maybe sort of like trying to set the table for what is coming. But yeah, somebody's going to try and take down Biden. The real key, though, is going to take place not on what happens on camera each and every day, but what happens behind the scenes in getting organization in Iowa. I made the point in my last column on this that, remember, we had this moment in November of 2007 where Barack Obama made a fantastic speech at the Jefferson Jackson Day dinner in Des Moines, Iowa, in front of thousands of Democrats, and it grabbed national attention. The polls, however, stayed roughly where they were until early January, January 3rd, when he got a surprise upset victory in Iowa against Hillary Clinton. What mattered was that he had spent months building an organization in the state.
Right.
The speech mattered because it has energized his people and brought some new converts to the cause. but it didn't change the polls, the national polls appreciably, but it guaranteed him the ability to score an upset, and he did, and that's when the contest began to close between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton in the national polls.
Let me go to Beto here. Beto O'Rourke, he was going to be the new hot young thing, and turns out he may have been a shooting star who fades out. What's gone wrong?
Well, in politics, you only have one chance to make a first impression, and Robert Francis O'Rourke did not make a particularly good first impression when he jumped out with the Vanity Fair article, and he went around the country gazing at his navel, and he jumped up on the stage in Iowa and New Hampshire with good crowds and lots of enthusiasm, but there didn't seem to be a there, and it proved again that before you jump into a contest, you better figure out what you want the arc of the narrative to be, and to have a plan that allows you to build that narrative for some 4 or 5 weeks. You contrast Robert Francis O'Rourke with Joe Biden. Biden has clearly got an idea of what he wants to do and how he's going to do it. I don't think he's not going to be able to continue to do it the way that he's doing, 2 events a day, low key, don't come into contact with the press. But nonetheless, he has a concrete idea of how he wants to launch himself into the contest. I don't think Robert Francis O'Rourke had given it that much thinking.
All right. Thank you, Karl. Appreciate your being here.
Well, every president can pardon federal crimes, and yes, pardons usually draw their own fair share of controversy. But now that President Trump has pardoned Lord Conrad Black, left-leaning media outlets, well, they're working overtime. They're trying to malign him, saying this pardon is only the result of a little flattery. People declares, and I quote, Donald Trump pardons disgraced media baron Conrad Black, who once wrote glowing book bio of him. Vox writes, Trump pardons billionaire fraudster who wrote glowing book about him. And from the Washington Post, after a 2-decade friendship and waves of lavish praise, Trump pardons newspaper magnate Conrad Black. You know, what liberal media is not actually telling you is that the Supreme Court vacated much of Black's former conviction, casting a whole lot of doubt on whether his case ever should have been prosecuted in the first place. And by the way, he served his time. Joining me right now, the former media tycoon just pardoned by the President of the United States, Lord Conrad Black. Good to have you here. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me, Trish.
So, what's your reaction? You surprised by the backlash over your pardon?
I haven't seen much of it, you know. I got a very nice editorial in the Wall Street Journal today, and you're citing television outlets I never watch, so I'm not surprised that they're writing this nonsense or telecasting this nonsense.
Yeah. But it's the kind of the time that we live in, right? To a certain extent.
Well,
I mean,
look,
anything he does is something
Trish, I
that
have to say this.
negatively.
The justice system in your case, so democracy, and if that's what you want, obviously you set up your country and govern it any way you want. But you have a conviction rate almost identical to North Korea's, 97% of the cases without a trial because of the way the plea bargain system is operated. And your prosecutors, many of them, are terrorizing the country. And the media, I'm not talking about Fox now, but the media is not doing its job. And the mistake these people, including the individuals, and I think this is why my case has got any attention, it's because I had to deal with Comey and Mueller and Patrick Fitzgerald also. Well, these people made the terrible mistake of attacking a person who they thought couldn't become president, but did. It's equal opportunity persecution by your prosecution service. And they started with 17 counts. They dropped 4. The jurors pitched 9. The Supreme Court vacated everything else, and one self-serving lower court judge to whom they remanded the vacated counts for the consideration of the gravity of his own errors resurrected 2 counts completely spuriously. As you said, I served 3 years and 2 weeks in federal prisons for crimes I did not commit, and the President assured me and urged me to say, which is nothing but the truth, that the reason he did it wasn't what I wrote about him or anything like that. It was that the White House counsel and their legal staff agreed with the legal analysis that Alan Dershowitz and other lawyers made on my behalf, and that I never should have been charged, and it was an unjust conviction and a bad rap. Those are quotes from the President when he called me.
Well, in some ways then, sir, you can certainly relate to what Donald Trump has been going through, right, over the last 2 years.
That's why you're getting the reaction you refer to. No one would care about me particularly, but the fact is some of the players are the same, and they managed to send me to jail or prison for 3 years. They were aiming, incidentally, for 105 years when they started, but they couldn't do it to him. They tried to do it to him, and it isn't working.
Well, it's not working, and we may see some other folks heading to jail. I mean, you know James Comey's lawyer because he went after you. It's interesting how incestuous these things sort of become, right?
Well, look what he did with Scooter Libby. It's not clear that he basically warped and mistreated Judith Miller's evidence, as she says. I mean, Patrick Fitzgerald couldn't lie straight in bed. In any other serious jurisdiction, he'd be disbarred. In Britain or Canada, he'd be out. I don't mean out as a prosecutor. I mean out of the bar. And we caught them again and again in falsehoods and illegal wiretaps and things. I mean, your prosecution service in many places is just out of control. And obviously, Comey and McCabe were out of control. But
and I think, by the way, if that comes out, and I think it will, Americans are going to be so disgusted, right, with the system, as you are disgusted with the system, given your own personal experience. But Americans, we like to believe in our institutions, right? I mean, there's maybe it's a naivete, but we like to believe that people are doing the right thing. And if it turns out,
it's not naive. It's the most successful country in the history of the world, and you're right to be proud of it. And everybody, and I never tire of saying this outside the U.S., everyone should remember and be grateful for the fact that we owe the triumph of democracy and the free market economy in the world to the United States. So don't portray me as anti-American. I'm anything but that. But there is a problem in the criminal justice system, and let us face facts. Brennan, Clapper, Comey, McCabe, and Hillary Clinton all lied to federal officials or under oath. And they set up that echo chamber with the Steele dossier, which is the dirtiest political trick in American history. And your competitors and some others are trying to pretend it didn't happen and is not happening, but it is all going to unravel. That's why I mean, I'm not one to mind read, but obviously that's why they're so hysterical about the Attorney General, who's an honest, decent man.
And that's why they don't like you. But let me ask you this, Conrad. Do you think that this is something that has occurred over many, many years, or is this something that was a result of the Obama administration that grew during that time? I mean, how should we be thinking about it? Because now you think, gosh, if it happened then, did it happen earlier? And we sure as heck hope that it doesn't happen in the future, which the president promises it won't.
Yeah, well, I think it started in the days of extreme fear about African American rioting, extreme fear about violation of women, and extreme fear on the drug side. And they're all, I'm not suggesting they aren't legitimate fears.
So what do you mean? Like, we're talking like hundreds of years ago, back to like Civil War times?
The United States had about the same conviction rate as other comparable prosperous democracies like Britain and Canada and France and so on, Australia, up until it all started to rise starting in the early 1960s, and then your number of incarcerated people is now 6 to 12 times per capita what it is in those countries I mentioned, or Germany or Japan, other prosperous democracies, and I mean 6 to 12 times, and you don't have a more crime-ridden population, and you don't have more talented prosecutors. It's because of how the plea bargain system works. I mean, if they go after you, then they round up the 8 people closest to you in whatever activity they're talking about, and they say, look, you'd better remember that Trish Regan did some bad things, or this is a conspiracy to obstruct justice, and we're charging you in it. And then if you jog your memory, it's like a catechism class, and if you manage to give the right answers, then you get a pass, including a guarantee of non-prosecution for perjury, and they just produce this inculpatory evidence that's false.
Yeah, they say don't fight the feds.
How does the jury see through that? But it's not justice.
Well, let me ask you, I mean, you look at what happened to Flynn, you look at what happened to Michael Cohen. Were those situations like that in your view? I mean, Jerome Corsi came on the show a few times. He said, they're not going to get me. I'm not going to, this is what happened as I remember it, and I'm not going to twist my story so that they can get something that might line up with the story that they want to hear. Did Flynn Did Cohen, in your view, have to compromise themselves in some way because of the pressure of the feds?
I think they're separate cases. Cohen, I think, has some problems that had nothing to do with the president, and they went after him for legal things that were problems that had nothing to do with him in order to get his cooperation in attacking the president. Poor old Roger Stone. I have no particular brief for Roger Stone, but he's a man in his 70s living with his wife and a dog and a cat in a peaceful suburb of Fort Lauderdale, and they reenacted D-Day, except they had helicopters as well as an amphibious assault, and 21 men wearing body armor carrying M16s to arrive at 6 a.m. to
Scary
arrest
stuff.
a 70-year-old man with no gun in his head. I mean, what are you coming to? This is the United States, not North Korea.
Well, congratulations, sir, on your pardon.
Thanks so much,
Good to see
Trish.
you.